What if the man next door, your friend, your neighbor, even your crush, was actually a killer? What if the boy you once trusted turned out to be a monster hiding behind a smile? In the summer of 1993, 18-year-old Tricia Pacaccio had everything to live for: a bright future, a loving family, and not a single clue that death was waiting just outside her door. Her murder would go unsolved for more than a decade, and the man responsible, he wouldn't stop at one. This is the chilling story of Tricia Pacaccio and the twisted path of Michael Gargiulo, the so-called Hollywood Ripper. If you're into gripping true crime stories that uncover the darkest corners of the human mind, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This one will leave you speechless. Tricia Pacaccio was the kind of daughter every parent dreamed of: smart, kind, ambitious. Just 18, she had just graduated from Glenbrook South High School in Glenview, Illinois. College was next. Dreams were big. On the night of August 13th, 1993, she went out with friends to celebrate her new life chapter. Laughter, photos, promises to keep in touch. No one suspected it would be her final goodbye. She returned home around 1 a.m., parking her car, walking up to her front door, and then she vanished into the night. The next morning, Tricia's younger brother made a horrifying discovery. Her lifeless body was sprawled on the doorstep. She had been brutally beaten, raped, and stabbed multiple times. The scene was gruesome. There were no signs of forced entry, no apparent motive. Her purse was untouched. This wasn't a robbery. It was personal, violent, planned. The Pacaccio family was shattered. Glenview, a quiet suburban town, was thrown into fear. How could something so evil happen here? Police began questioning those close to Tricia: friends, classmates, neighbors. One name stood out: Michael Gargiulo. He was Tricia's neighbor, just 17 at the time. Friendly, helpful, a familiar face. But something about him didn't sit right with investigators. He claimed he had nothing to do with it, but rumors swirled. Tricia's friends recalled she had once found him unsettling. Still, without physical evidence, the case stalled. Gargiulo slipped through the cracks and slipped out of Illinois entirely. Gargiulo moved to Los Angeles, reinventing himself. But his demons didn't stay behind. Over the next decade, a string of women in his orbit would meet eerily similar fates. In 2001, 22-year-old Ashley Ellerin, a fashion student dating actor Ashton Kutcher, was found stabbed 47 times in her Hollywood home. Kutcher arrived for their date that night, only to find her door locked and blood on the floor. In 2005, 32-year-old Maria Bruno was stabbed to death in her own bed, slashed so brutally even her breast implants were punctured. In 2008, Michelle Murphy was attacked in her Santa Monica apartment, but she fought back. She survived, and her attacker left behind a drop of blood. That single mistake would be Gargiulo's undoing. DNA from the Murphy crime scene matched Michael Gargiulo. He was arrested. Police began connecting the dots between all the victims. Different cities, same method. A chilling pattern of control and slaughter. When detectives revisited Tricia Pacaccio's case back in Illinois, they compared DNA again, this time using advanced testing. It was a match. Gargiulo had been right there, in plain sight, all along. He had murdered Tricia on her doorstep, then fled the state, and kept killing. In court, prosecutors painted Gargiulo as a serial sexual thrill killer, someone who derived pleasure from stalking and stabbing his victims. He studied his targets, watched them, gained their trust, then waited until the perfect moment to strike. During the trial, Ashton Kutcher even testified, describing how he had shown up late to Ashley Ellerin's apartment the night she was killed. He thought she was upset for missing their date, not lying dead inside. The jury was horrified. In 2019, Gargiulo was convicted of 2 murders and 1 attempted murder. He still faces trial in Illinois for Tricia Pacaccio's murder, but justice, at long last, is near. For the Pacaccio family, no punishment will ever erase the pain of that morning in 1993. But after 26 years, they finally have answers. They finally know the face of the killer. Tricia Pacaccio's story is a reminder of how evil can wear the mask of normalcy, how a monster can live right next door, and how justice, no matter how delayed, is always worth the fight. Rest in peace, Tricia. What if your sister vanished during a romantic date, and 46 years passed without answers? What if her killer lived just miles away the entire time, raising a family, waving at neighbors, eating dinner with no remorse? That's exactly what happened in Fort Worth, Texas, in 1974. Carla Walker was just 17 when she was abducted, in front of her boyfriend. Beaten, raped, murdered. Her killer vanished without a trace, until DNA cracked open the past. This is the horrifying story of Carla Walker's murder and the man who thought he got away with it. It was February 16, 1974, a cool Saturday night in Fort Worth, Texas. Carla Jan Walker, a 17-year-old high school junior, was the girl everyone loved. Popular, kind, with bright blue eyes and a winning smile. She was dating Rodney McCoy, the star quarterback of Western Hills High School. That night, the couple attended a Valentine's Day dance. They laughed, posed for photos, and looked like the perfect teenage couple. Afterward, they drove to a local bowling alley parking lot, a popular hangout spot for teens. What happened next changed everything. As the couple kissed inside Rodney's car, someone suddenly flung the car door open. Before Rodney could react, the man hit him over the head with a pistol, knocking him unconscious. When Rodney came to, Carla was gone. She had been kidnapped right in front of him. Fort Worth police sprang into action. Missing person flyers were posted within hours. Volunteers searched wooded areas. Carla's family was in agony. 3 days later, a grim discovery was made. Carla's body was found dumped in a culvert near Benbrook Lake. She had been raped, tortured, and strangled. Her dress was torn. Her shoes and purse were nearby. The autopsy showed she had been severely beaten and strangled, possibly with a wire or cord. She had fought hard, but the monster who took her was stronger. The case rattled Fort Worth. How could something like this happen to someone so pure, so close to home? Police interviewed over 100 people, including Carla's boyfriend, Rodney. But Rodney was ruled out quickly. He had a head injury, was traumatized, and desperately wanted to help. A man named Glenn McCurley also came under brief suspicion. Why? Because he owned a .22 Ruger pistol, the same type used in the abduction. But when officers visited McCurley's home, he claimed the gun had been stolen. With no other evidence linking him to the crime, he was crossed off the suspect list. The case soon went cold. While Fort Worth moved on, the Walker family never did. Her father, Leighton Walker, would sit in her room and cry. Her mother, Doris, stopped celebrating holidays. Her brother Jim carried her photo everywhere, always asking, "Why hasn't anyone found her killer?" For decades, the family pleaded with police to reopen the case. They sent letters, made phone calls, and begged the media to cover Carla's story. Still, nothing. Then everything changed in the late 2010s. New forensic technology, specifically genetic genealogy, began solving cold cases across the country. So in 2020, Fort Worth detectives decided to revisit Carla's file. They sent preserved biological evidence to Othram Inc., a private DNA lab specializing in cold case genealogy. Weeks later, they got a hit. The DNA pointed to a family line. And within that tree, one man stood out. Glenn Samuel McCurley, the same man from 1974. McCurley was now 78 years old, living quietly in Fort Worth. He had worked various odd jobs, married, raised children, and lived like any ordinary man. But detectives were watching. They followed him to restaurants and public places, waiting for him to discard anything with his DNA. One day, McCurley threw away a used straw and fast food napkin. That was all they needed. The DNA on the straw was a direct match to the DNA found on Carla Walker's clothing, 46 years earlier. In August 2020, Glenn McCurley was arrested and brought in for questioning. At first, he denied everything, said he didn't know Carla, didn't remember the night. But as investigators revealed the DNA match, his story started to crumble. Eventually, McCurley admitted to the crime. He claimed he had been drinking heavily, had a rage episode, and didn't plan it. He said he saw the couple, attacked Rodney, then dragged Carla into his car. He took her home, raped her, then strangled her to death. He dumped her body like trash, and went on with his life. In August 2021, McCurley stood trial. Carla's surviving family members filled the courtroom, finally seeing the man who stole their daughter, sister, and friend. McCurley pled guilty in the middle of the trial. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jim Walker, Carla's brother, stood and said, "You didn't just kill Carla. You destroyed our family, but we never gave up. And now, justice has found you." Carla's case wasn't just solved. It changed everything. It showed that cold cases can be cracked, even decades later. It proved that justice delayed isn't always justice denied, and it became a powerful warning to others. The truth is always in the blood. Since Carla's case, more families have stepped forward asking investigators to reopen old files, because Carla Walker's legacy is now one of hope, not just heartbreak. Carla Walker never got to graduate, never got to go to college, never got to become the nurse she dreamed of being. But today, her name lives on through justice, perseverance, and love. She was just 16, a straight-A student, a cheerleader, and full of life. But on a cold December morning in 1991, Sarah Yarborough left home to meet her drill team and never returned. The killer would leave her lifeless in a wooded area, less than 200 yards from her school parking lot. And then he vanished without a trace for almost 30 years. This is the story of Sarah Yarborough and how her killer, Patrick Nicholas, was finally caught by the one thing he didn't count on: his own blood. Sarah Yarborough was everything you'd expect from a bright small-town teen in Federal Way, Washington. She was on the honor roll, part of the school's elite drill team, and well-loved by everyone around her. That Saturday, December 14th, 1991, Sarah arrived early at Federal Way High School. It was barely 9 a.m. She parked her car and got out to meet the rest of her team for a competition. But she would never make it inside. Just before 9:30 a.m., two 12-year-old boys walking in a nearby wooded area made a horrifying discovery. Lying in the dirt, partially clothed and clearly lifeless, was Sarah Yarborough's body. She had been raped and strangled, her face bruised and her neck marked with pressure wounds. The boys ran for help. Police arrived quickly, sealing off the scene, but it was too late. Who could do this to a 16-year-old girl in broad daylight on school grounds? Eyewitnesses recalled seeing a strange man near Sarah's car earlier that morning. One student described him as having long blonde hair and wearing a trench coat. A sketch artist quickly rendered a composite drawing. But even with the description and several interviews, no suspect was ever arrested. What haunted investigators was how brazen the crime had been. Sarah had been attacked just yards away from the school, in a relatively open area. The killer didn't care about witnesses, or perhaps he thought no one would ever catch him. Despite hundreds of tips, interviews, and even using early DNA testing, the case went cold. For years, the sketch of the blonde man haunted the walls of the King County Sheriff's Office. But there were no hits in the DNA databases, no confessions, no breaks. Sarah's parents, devastated, continued to plead with the public. Someone knows something. But years passed, then decades, and the case that once dominated headlines faded into memory. Fast forward to 2019, nearly 28 years after Sarah's murder. Technology had finally caught up. Using genetic genealogy, the same technique that led to the arrest of the Golden State Killer, detectives once again ran the killer's DNA through a new type of system. Not a criminal database, but a genealogy site. This time, they found a familial match and built a tree. One name stood out: Patrick Leon Nicholas, a man with a violent history and a disturbing past. Nicholas was no stranger to law enforcement. He had been convicted in 1983 of a brutal sexual assault in Idaho. He was released on parole after serving just 6 years. By the time of Sarah's murder in 1991, he was a free man, living just hours away from Federal Way. When investigators began tailing him in 2019, they collected a discarded item to get his DNA. The results came back. It was an exact match to the DNA found on Sarah's body in 1991. In October 2019, police knocked on Patrick Nicholas's door. He was arrested for the rape and murder of Sarah Yarborough, almost 3 decades after the crime. When questioned, Nicholas denied everything. He claimed he had no memory of Sarah, no reason to be near her school. But DNA doesn't lie. The evidence was overwhelming. And the look in his mugshot? Cold, remorseless. Nicholas was charged with first-degree murder with sexual motivation. His trial began in 2023, where prosecutors laid out a chilling narrative. He saw Sarah alone. He attacked her in broad daylight. He strangled her, then walked away, as if nothing had happened. He had almost gotten away with it. But thanks to DNA and patience, justice had finally caught up. In May 2023, Patrick Nicholas was convicted and sentenced to 46 years in prison. For the Yarborough family, it was the justice they waited 32 years to see. Sarah Yarborough should have gone to college. She should have lived to see her 30s, her 40s, a life filled with promise. But her life was taken by a man who thought time would erase his crime. What he didn't expect was that even decades later, science, perseverance, and justice would finally pull him from the shadows. In a quiet New Hampshire town, a barrel was found behind a wooded trail. Inside, the dismembered remains of a woman and a child. No names, no clues, just bones and questions. It would take decades, multiple aliases, and a coast-to-coast killing spree before investigators would realize they were dealing with a man who didn't exist. Terry Rasmussen wore many faces: Bob Evans, Larry Vanner, Gordon Jensen. But behind each mask was a killer, a father and a predator hiding in plain sight. And he didn't just kill strangers, he killed the women who trusted him most. This is the story of the Chameleon Killer, one of America's most terrifying, most cunning serial murderers, and chances are you've never even heard his real name. Terry Petter Rasmussen wasn't just a murderer, he was a shapeshifter, a master manipulator. A man who wore identities like outfits, blending in just enough to stay one step ahead. This case would span 4 decades, involve 5 confirmed victims, with many more suspected, and leave 2 generations of investigators scrambling to piece together a puzzle he designed to be unsolvable. But in the end, DNA, science, and the relentless pursuit of justice caught up with him. Let's uncover how a man with no past left a trail of bodies across America. Terry Rasmussen was born in 1943 in Colorado. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. He was raised in Phoenix, Arizona, dropped out of high school, and later joined the U.S. Navy. By the 1960s, he had 4 children with his wife, but things quickly fell apart. Domestic violence, alcohol abuse, estrangement. After his divorce, Rasmussen vanished from his family's lives and began what would become his double life, changing names, moving states, and creating entirely new identities. This is when the chameleon was born. In the late 1970s in California, he introduced himself as Bob Evans. He met a woman named Marlene Bowden, a single mother. Soon after they began dating, she vanished. Her body wouldn't be found until years later, buried under a trailer. Her daughter, Lisa, who Rasmussen had claimed as his own, would be kidnapped by him and live for years with her father, a man who wasn't who he claimed to be. This was a common pattern: meet a woman, build trust, then make her disappear. Fast forward to 1985, Allenstown, New Hampshire. A metal barrel is found in the woods near Bear Brook State Park. Inside, the remains of an adult woman. The remains of a young girl. About 9 years old, investigators were horrified. The woman's skull showed blunt force trauma. The child, her daughter, died the same way. But there was no ID, no leads. The case went cold. In 2000, a second barrel was found. 2 more young girls, all murdered similarly. DNA later confirmed the woman in the first barrel was the mother of 2 of the 3 children. The third child? No biological relation. But the connection to Rasmussen was still years away. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Rasmussen drifted. He was Curtis Kimball in California, Bob Evans in New Hampshire, Gordon Jensen in Texas. Each time he embedded himself in communities, dated single mothers, and then, poof, they disappeared. In 2002, he was arrested for killing his girlfriend Yoon Jun in California. He buried her under cat litter in the basement. But even then, authorities didn't know his real name. He was using yet another alias, Larry Vanner. It wasn't until 2017, 2 years after Rasmussen died in prison, that the truth finally began to unravel. Thanks to the rise of genealogical DNA, investigators matched the Bear Brook barrel victims to Terry Rasmussen. They also identified Lisa, the girl he abducted, and tracked her to living relatives. That was the key to unmasking his real identity and linking him to multiple murders across several states. The barrels. The buried victims. The missing women. All paths led back to the same man. While only a few of his murders are confirmed, experts believe Terry Rasmussen could be responsible for dozens of deaths. He had the time, the pattern, and the mobility. He was smart, calculating, and utterly remorseless. Police now suspect him in several cold cases involving missing women and children, victims who may never be identified. He was, in every sense, a predator who hunted under the guise of love. The Chameleon Killer's legacy is a haunting one. He lived and died without ever facing trial for most of his crimes. Many of his victims are still unknown. Families remain without closure. But his story changed how investigators use DNA, how they track aliases, and how serial killers hide in plain sight. His case helped pioneer genetic genealogy, which has since solved dozens of cold cases. Terry Rasmussen lived as a ghost, a man who rewrote his identity every time he killed. But even ghosts leave traces, and thanks to science, persistence, and justice, those traces eventually told the truth.